Hi, I'm Larry Richardson and welcome to Zenius.com Cooking. Today we're going to make tomato basil pasta, which is absolutely a fantastic vegetarian dish, or it makes a great side dish. Now if you want to make this as a complete dish including protein, you're also welcome to follow along with us and add seasoned chicken to it. I'll show you how to make each one of these components easily, step by step. You won't get lost, and in the end you will have a delicious meal. So come on, let's cook. Now your basic tomato basil pasta recipe is pretty much what it says. It's tomatoes. I have 6 medium-sized tomatoes here. I would estimate each serving is about 1 tomato, so we have 6 servings worth of tomatoes. I have basil that I grew myself. You can also buy this at a supermarket, or you can even go over to a place like Home Depot or a local nursery and buy some plants and trim them before you plant them, and you can still make this recipe. We also have a head of garlic, which we'll use about half of it, all crushed up. I have extra virgin olive oil, and we have some whole grain angel hair pasta. Now the whole grain pastas have come a long way from the old days when they used to stay chewy no matter how long you cooked them. I really like the angel hair because it's a light gauge pasta that it doesn't take too much to get it to taste like just a regular pasta. So go with the whole grain, it's better for you. The other ingredient is salt. Now we don't add the salt when we're cooking the recipe. What I recommend is that you leave it out and then people can salt their dish to their own tasting. So leave the salt out and put it on the table and let people salt it as they see fit. So now we're going to start preparing the different ingredients. Now the first thing I like to do is deal with the tomatoes, get them all chopped up. The reason I don't go for the basil first is the basil is very delicate, and if I start working on that, it may be browned or even black by the time I get to it. So the first thing we're going to do is chop the tomatoes. Now what I want to do is cut the tomato in half sideways like that. And then what I'm going to do is take each section over to my sink and get rid of the seeds. Because if you leave the seeds and pulp in this dish, it's just going to become one soggy mess. So make sure that you get these seeds out. So I literally just took my finger with underneath the water and just went like that and cleaned the seeds out of the tomato. So I'll do that for each section. Okay, once the seeds are removed, what you want to do is take the tomato and just cut it like this. Cut it into small pieces. So those are about, I would say, about an eighth to, or rather a quarter to a half-inch thick pieces. And I'm just going to cut it down like this into little squares. Now if you like a more robust dish, you may want to leave it into slightly larger segments, but I like mine, sort of in bite-sized pieces. Now I'm cutting the core out of this tomato. There we go. Throw that away. Then I'm going to cut the tomato again, like this. Now I don't mind a little bit of the core section in my tomato basil. If you want, that's this section here. If you want, you can remove that. I'd imagine for some purists it would bother them to have it in that shape. So there you have it. That's the basic cube size that you want your tomatoes in. And I'm going to repeat this for the other 5 tomatoes. And there we have it, all of our tomatoes chopped up and de-seeded. The next thing we're going to do is add as much garlic as we like. Now this is a full head of garlic. I don't recommend you add all of this. It will just overpower the dish. Personally, I like to add between a quarter and a half of a head of garlic. Now that's hot for a lot of people. A lot of people would not like this much, but I do like my food spicy. So it's really nothing to me to add this much. So there we go. That's about a quarter to a half of a head of garlic. And what I like to do is take these cloves and put it in a crusher. Now these crushers are very inexpensive and you can buy them at pretty much any department store. And what it does is it takes the paper right off of the garlic. So you just do that, you scrape it, into the dish. Then you just remove the paper and you move on to the next clove. Now if your clove is a little bit too big, you can chop it in half before you do this to it, because it does take a little bit of power to get this thing to crush all the way through. So there we go. Save a little bit of that garlic. Peel it out. And here comes another one. And I guess you could leave the garlic out altogether if you wanted to. Some people don't like garlic at all. And you still have a pretty tasty tomato and basil dish. So let's go. And we have one more to do. That looks like a chopper. So I'm going to chop this one in half. Okay. And then put it in one half at a time. Some of these are kind of busting up a little bit funny, so I'm trying to grab as much of the garlic meat as I can from the inside of the crusher. And that's it for the garlic. Now what I'll do is I'll add some olive oil to keep this mix fresh. I would recommend adding about 2 tablespoons. It is not too much, especially when you consider it spread over 6 servings, the 6 servings that we're making. So I'm adding this. This also helps the garlic and the tomato, the best of their taste to combine too. So I'm adding that, and I'll give that a little bit of a stir. Be real gentle with it. You don't want to crush up your tomatoes. And this is really working that garlic. Wow, does that smell good? It's really working the garlic into the tomatoes. I could almost just sit around and eat spoons full of this. Yum. Okay, and now I'm going to set this aside, and I'll show you how to prepare the basil leaves. Here are our basil leaves, at least half of the basil leaves that we have. Give them a good rinse, give them a shake, get the excess water off of them, and then just start picking them off the stem. They smell delicious all on their own. Do it just like this and try to get as little stem as you can into the dish. Wow, that smells good. Discard the stems. And there you go. Now as you get these little piles organized, you may want to leave them whole if you like your basil kind of as a green in this dish. Personally, I like to chop them up a little bit finer. So I would just take my knife and chop them into pieces like this. But don't go too small with it because the basil will disappear. So leave them about this size. Well, I guess that didn't demonstrate it the best. About that size. And then what you'll do is just keep adding this into the tomato mixture. And I'll show you what it looks like with all the basil in it and all stirred up in a moment. And there it is, our basic tomato basil pasta mix. So again, it's 6 tomatoes, several bunches of basil, half to a quarter of a head of garlic, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil, all mixed together. Now if you're going to make this as a side dish, then speed forward in this video past where I'm making the chicken, or if you want this to be a vegetarian dish, because this is very delicious just on its own. But for people who want to make this dish into a complete pasta meal, you will want to continue with me, and I'll show you how to make the chicken that we'll add into this dish. Keep in mind that you should start your water now for your pasta just so that it's ready when this is done. This cooks really fast. I mean really fast. So you want to make sure to have the pasta ready so that right when this is done, you can put this on top of it. Because the less that it stays hot, or the less that it sits between the time we cook it and the time you actually eat it, the better. So now I'll show you how to make the chicken. If you decided you did want to add chicken to your tomato basil pasta, you'll want to use about a pound of chicken breast. That is, 2 half breasts or 1 whole breast of white meat chicken. We're also going to use a little bit of olive oil, and we're going to use dried Italian seasonings. Now, if you have fresh Italian seasonings, parsley, oregano, rosemary, and thyme, feel more than welcome to chop them up and add them into the chicken component. But for our purposes, we're just going to use about 1/8 to 1/4 of a teaspoon of Italian seasonings. You can choose which according to your taste. So we're going to take the chicken and we'll chop it into smaller pieces. Now there's one thing I want you to keep in mind whenever you're cooking. Be sure to keep chicken or any other kind of meat separate from the cutting board you use for vegetables or anything that's non-meat. The odds of cross-contaminating your dish are higher if you use the same cutting board for both, especially if it's taking you a while to cook. You don't want vegetables sitting around that have been coated in meat, basically, or meat fat. So you want to make sure, keep them separate, chop them on separate surfaces, and you'll really reduce the odds of cross-contamination and getting ill. So as you can see, I'm cutting this into small cubes, about this size. I don't want really large cubes because if we have large cubes in tomato basil, they'll really kind of rob the dish of its flavor. You want everything to be bite-sized. I've preheated a pan over medium heat for about 5 minutes to make sure it's fully preheated, and we're going to cook the chicken in this pan. I want to use about a teaspoon of oil. I'm going to use our olive oil to make sure that the chicken does not stick to the pan. There we go. And then I'm going to add the chicken. I don't want the chicken to burn, so I want to keep it moving. I also want to make sure that it cooks all the way through. That process could take, depending on your stove, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. You absolutely do not want to see any pink left when you cut into the chicken. And here we are back 10 minutes later. The chicken has cooked all the way through. I can tell this because when I use my spoon to cut a piece in half, you can see it's cooked all the way through. And I don't want it to become too rubbery, so I really have to stop heating it up very shortly. At this point, what I want to do is add my dried Italian seasonings to it. You really don't want to add too much dried Italian seasonings. You don't want it to overpower your tomato basil mix. So I'm adding a half a tablespoon. But there we go. And like any recipe, after you make it the first time, you can make it your own and decide how much of these different ingredients you want to add to your taste. So I'm just giving this probably about 1 more minute to cook with the Italian seasonings in it. And then what we're going to do is quick cook the tomato basil mix itself. So hopefully by the time we start that, your pasta will be just about done. So read on the box of pasta how long it takes to cook and decide accordingly when you want to add it. I would say add it right now. So I'm going to move the chicken mix off of the burner and set it aside, and we'll go over and we'll get started with the tomato basil part. Now my pasta has about 2 more minutes to cook. This is a great time to get going with the tomato and basil mix. I want the tomato and basil mix to taste really fresh. I don't want to overcook it. I just want to give it a very slight sauté. That way the tomato pieces will stay independent, they won't just fall apart, and the basil leaves will taste very fresh too. We already added oil to the mix, so I'm not adding any oil to this pan, which has been preheated halfway between off and quarter heat. So that's number 2 on the dial on most stoves. Or again, halfway between off and a quarter heat. So here's what I'm going to do. Just simply spoon this into this pan. And keep it moving. Wow, I can really smell the tomatoes, the garlic starting to come out of the dish, and the basil leaves. Wow, are they sweet and green smelling. I love this dish. So again, I'm just really warming this up. There we go, let it sit for a moment. Give it a little bit more of a stir. Really light sauté. And I'm starting to see a hint of steam rising up off of this mixture. That means it's getting warmed up. And again, I like mine really fresh, so that sign of steam, that's plenty of heat for me. I'm going to take it off the heat now. So here you have it, a complete meal. Tomato basil pasta with chicken. Or maybe you decided to make it side dish or vegetarian style with just the tomato basil ingredients. Whichever way you made it, I am absolutely certain this dish will be a crowd pleaser. If you want the recipe, please go to my site Zeniors.com and put in tomato basil into the search window, and you'll get a copy of the recipe that you can print. Also, look around at some of the other healthy recipes that are there. You just might find some more crowd pleasers that the people in your home will certainly like. So until next time, I'm Larry Richardson. Thank you for joining me on Zeniors.com Cooking.